Hi, everybody. It's Mary Rowe from the Canadian Urban Institute. Really pleased to be welcoming you to yet another mobilization session for the Canada Healthy Communities Initiative. We're working closely with Community Foundations of Canada and partners across the country, one of whom was joining us today, 880 Cities, to talk about the mobility components of this, how we can marshal new ways of getting around. 880 has been active in this space for a number of years, even though they're so youthful, as you're about to see, but they have been active in this space for a number of years, and it's one of Canada's great non-for-profits doing this kind of animation work, and we've been so pleased to have them involved with this initiative from the get-go. And I know that there'll be many folks on the call who will come in today who are familiar with their work and will benefit now from hearing what their particular perspectives are. Just to remind you, we are a national organization, a national initiative, and so I happen to be signing in today from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Now it's home to many diverse First Nations and Métis people from across what is called Turtle Island. Toronto is also covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Anishinaabe nations. We often ask people who come on to these sessions to sign in where you're coming from, and I see some folks are, so by all means, just check in with us, tell us where you're coming from, and your own land acknowledgement if you'd like, to acknowledge the heritage, the legacy of the land in which you happen to be working or living, and also how we are collectively working to engage reconciliation as being part of our daily practice as city builders and as placemakers. Certainly COVID has made very clear, I think, to all of us engaged in this kind of work, the extent to which we have to be much more mindful and participatory in communities to make sure that people that are in communities are engaging directly, and that they not only benefit from whatever the outcome of these projects would be, but that they're actually participating directly, and we hope initiating projects. So yesterday we were on with a bunch of First Nation folks. We've been doing sessions with different constituencies, and as I suggested today, it's with 880 Cities. Just a friendly Zoom reminder for those of you. I can't imagine anybody still needs to know how to work Zoom, although we all still seem to forget about the mute button. But anyway, just to say, remember, you can see and hear us, but we can't see you. If you have any questions, put them into the chat box, please. And they'll be fed into the discussion later. And also, this session is being recorded. It'll be available on Community Foundation of Canada's website after the session. As you know, the session is available in French and English. So the way you do with that is you go down to the little globe down bottom right, and you indicate the language in which you would like to be hearing, what language you'd like to be hearing, and you'll be able to hear the language you prefer. And other than that, I think all of you know that this initiative, we're in the first portal window. You can apply for funding between $5,000 and $250,000. There's lots and lots of specifics available on the site, that the slide that's being put up there, to suggest what's going on, and you have access to those resources. We encourage you to visit the website, healthycommunitiesinitiative.ca, to find out how you can apply. And then these sessions, which are happening last week and this week, are involving partners in engaging in conversation with all of us about how we mobilize ourselves. Let's just remember that we're in the placemaking business to make communities better, more livable, more equitable, more resilient. And this funding program is a way to help us jumpstart and support a movement of placemaking, which is really important, I think, for Canada and for Canada's communities. So very appreciative that you are participating with us today. Really looking forward to whatever kinds of initiatives people are coming up with. And just remember, we're in for the long haul here. This is a funding initiative that's going to roll out this year, but let's hope there'll be more opportunities to fund these kinds of initiatives and projects, and how great that we're all together being able to contribute to thinking about how the recovery from COVID is going to be made possible by better places and these kinds of investments and projects that you're all coming up with. So good luck today. I'm going to introduce Lanrick Bennett from 880, and it's his session. Over to you, Lanrick. Thanks again, 880. Really pleased to have you working with us, and good luck today. I'm looking forward to hearing about the session.
Thank you so much, Mary. Good afternoon to our viewers. I hope everyone's in a comfy chair. My name is Lanrick Bennett Jr. I'm the Managing Director for 880 Cities. I'll be joined today from our Senior Project Manager at 880 Cities, Rosanna Tudo. Today we're going to be putting forth an introduction to you about 880 Cities. We're also going to be running through some of the COVID recovery and mobility principles. Rosanna will then be taking you through some case study examples of mobility projects from across North America. And finally, we'll spend some time after all of that to answer some of your questions about implementing mobility projects, as well as any questions specifically for the grant process. So who is 880 Cities? What is 880 Cities? We're a non-profit organization based here in Toronto. We bring people together to improve streets, parks, and public spaces towards the creation of a happier, healthier, and more equitable city. Our mission is to improve the quality of life for people in cities, no matter their age, ability, or socioeconomic status. Over the last 15 years, our organization has worked in over 300 cities, touching 5 continents, from Copenhagen to Atlanta, Melbourne to Buffalo, Saskatchewan, and Edmonton, and right here in Toronto. We're driven by asking a very basic but serious question. What if everything we did in our cities, everything, was safe, accessible, and enjoyable for an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old? Cities would then be great for everyone. Environments shape our health and our well-being just as much as they shape everything in general. The makeup, that DNA soup of what makes you you, on a genetic level, for the most part, is thanks to your parents. Your ongoing health, your education, your safety is influenced heavily by where that Google Map pin is dropped. Is the water you drink clean? Do you have access to libraries, community centers, and cultural hubs? Are you driven to school, or can you walk safely to and fro? Our postal code determines our health just as much, and maybe more, than that genetic code. Over the past 80 years, we've built public spaces in ways that exclude and do not promote health. It's an unbalanced lifestyle in general. We have centered our cities around cars, and that is an exclusive way of building cities that disproportionately negatively puts effects on our children, older adults, and the economical marginalized population. The good news is that we're rethinking the role of our streets and public spaces. There is a tremendous opportunity to change the dynamics and provide foundations for healthier, age-friendly cities. You open your front door and you can see what is out there to be able to change and reformat, and we really want to be a part of that. At 880 Cities, there are 3 ingredients in creating, at least we feel there's 3 ingredients in creating a more age-friendly city. We call these ingredients the 3 rights: the right to mobility, the right to public space, and the right to participate. The right to mobility states every resident has the right to move in and around their neighborhoods, their communities, and their city in a way that is safe, healthy, and affordable and sustainable. The right to public space states every resident has the right to accessible, safe, and well-maintained public parks and public spaces that can offer high-quality programming and activities. The right to participate. Every resident has that right to participate in the decision-making process that affects their quality of life and sense of belonging in public space. Today, we're going to focus on the right to mobility. In an 880 friendly city, everyone, no matter their age or ability, should have the right to move safely and independently by walking, bicycling, and using public transit. This isn't a war on cars, but this is to allow there to be a different way, a better way of moving around. During COVID-19, improving how we get around is more important than ever. The ability to comfortably get around in our neighborhoods, in our communities, access basic services, stay active outdoors, all while staying physically distant, is essential in our health and well-being during the pandemic. For communities that have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19, the goal is to make the experience of getting around as safe and accessible and welcoming as possible. There are 6 principles that we want you to keep in mind as you plan, implement your mobility projects. The first is to start with people. People, you, I, everyone. Where do they live? Where are they coming from? And how are they getting to you, your program or events? You want to be putting on a lens that has you creating an equitable community engagement. Safety. Different people have different ideas of what is safe. What makes one group feel safe may in fact not make another group feel safe. The real and perceived mindset, they both matter. COVID-19 adds another layer, of course, of safety considerations on top of that. You want to be able to take the time to think outside of your able body. It's okay to lean on the 880 city namesake. What would be safe for an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old? As you're planning for safety, make sure accessibility is also part of that blueprint. When you're planning for an event, for programming, you'll be anticipating that people with various types of disabilities, which may or may not be visible, will want to be a part of what you're creating. You'll be considering how you can minimize the number of barriers and also inviting participants to notify you of any possible accommodations that they'll need in advance or during the programming that you have planned. Accessibility also means taking into account affordability, making it low cost or even free. When we talk about comfort, you want to be able to encourage people to stay long, to linger without feeling any pressure of moving on. Create seating, allow views, let people take a break from their normal activities. We want to be able to strive to allow people to truly enjoy their public space, enjoy their streets, enjoy the space around them. The management and programming, you'll want to make sure you have the right people on your team, people that are looking at a understanding and a focus outside of just that normal event or piece that has to be. You want to really be able to choose adventure and choose pieces that really stand out to allow you and allow participants to have fun. You're looking at the logistics of your staff, your volunteers, making sure that people are understanding what it is that they need to bring to the table. We want to be thinking about how, especially with the programming, you want to be able to think about how to bring people back. You don't want this just to be a one-time activity. It's a continuous motion going forward. We want to be able to keep things interesting. And if there's any ability to change small nuances, let's do it. Finally, you'll be looking at measuring what it is that you're doing and evaluating it as well. That measurement is about the numbers and being able to quantify what it is that you're putting in place. The evaluation, of course, is assisted with using the data that you are bringing in, and it gives you that information to judge the success or failure of what it is that you're putting forth. You want to be able to ask the questions honestly. How will you know what is successful? Plotting out exact locations as you audit each space for movement and or usage. Drilling down to measure what it is that you care about, but also what the people participating care about as well. You're telling a story with that data. And I'm gonna move this on right over to Rosanna.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be sharing a few examples of mobility projects from across North America. Some of these examples were projects that were completed pre-COVID, but are nonetheless approaches that can be used in response to COVID-19 to help people maintain physical distance and get around more safely. And I want to emphasize that the examples that we're going to be exploring today are not exhaustive of the types of mobility projects that would be eligible for funding. So please make sure to read through the applicant guide for further guidance and details about this. And again, please feel free to use the chat to share your mobility ideas. I know there's people joining us from across the country, and the more sharing of ideas and collaboration, the better. So the first set of projects I'll share with you are ones focused on increasing the safety, accessibility, and enjoyment of streets through temporary design and programming interventions. These are projects that provide more room and space for people to practice physical distancing while also supporting other aspects of social and health equity. Because these projects involve changing the configuration, design, and operation of streets, they often require that the community-based organizations that are leading them work very, very closely with their local government throughout the entire process. This often means getting support from your local counselor early on and reaching out to your transportation department to co-develop an approach and obtain the necessary permits. So the first project I want to highlight is one we 880 Cities worked on in Toronto in summer of 2019 called 880 Streets Danforth. For years, locals had been asking for improvements to this busy 4-lane commercial corridor. And we engaged the community, dug a little deeper, and asked residents and business owners, what would it take to make Danforth Avenue safer and more enjoyable for people of all ages? Based on what we heard, we created a concept plan to create a 3-day pop-up demonstration of a safe and complete street in hopes of building momentum and evidence to support a more permanent solution. The local councillor got on board, and in order to obtain our permits, our team worked really closely with the city's transportation department over several months to develop multiple drafts of a plan. And when we landed on one, we started building the project on a Thursday, and by Friday afternoon, we had transformed the street from this image you see here to this. And so what you see are 4 driving lanes went down to 2. We painted street murals, installed additional greenery, pedestrian scale lighting, patio seating, parklets, performance spaces, traffic safety improvements, and even a separated bike lane. The materials we used to build out the installation were very simple and low cost. We used plywood furniture, children's finger paint for the bike lanes and the mural. We worked with over 100 enthusiastic volunteers from the neighborhood to help build the installation out. And in 29 hours, we implemented the community's vision for their street. We made sure to record activity on the street before and during the pop-up to understand the impact of the transformation. And we found out that the pop-up doubled the number of people walking and biking on the street. And this chart that you're looking at shows you that there were far more children and youth and older adults spending time on the street during the pop-up compared to before. This project took place in the summer of 2019. And a year later, in the summer of 2020, when COVID had already hit, the City of Toronto installed a much longer and more permanent installation along Danforth, incorporating a lot of the elements that our pilot project utilized, including the street murals, traffic calming, and patio seating. This was part of a larger citywide effort to provide safe transportation and business opportunities while maintaining physical distancing guidelines. So it turns out safer streets are also safer COVID streets. So while the Danforth example includes a lot of different design and programming elements, many communities have benefited from taking a more pared down, quick and low cost approach to providing wider sidewalks that can better accommodate physical distancing. We've seen this done in various contexts, like here in a dense downtown neighborhood, Davie Street in Vancouver, where an entire parking lane was repurposed to create additional space for walking. And they put up these meter-high barriers to separate people walking from the vehicular traffic. We've also seen a similar approach in smaller communities, like here in Winnipeg Beach, where they use these lower profile delineators to better accommodate the number of visitors and people walking here in the summer. So in both the Vancouver and Winnipeg beach example, these interventions were led by the local government, but depending on the community context in which you're working, it could certainly be a partnership between a local community organization and the local government. Another COVID-19 response we've seen take place in a lot of communities are slow streets programs. This one in Oakland was initially conceived as a relatively quick and low-cost way to accommodate the fact that more people were working from home and relying on their neighborhood streets as places to get fresh air and exercise. And so what they did was they just installed signage and barricades on local streets to slow down cars and eliminate through traffic. The idea was that these slow streets could help create a safer and more welcoming environment for people walking and biking. But for many residents of East Oakland, a predominantly Black, Latinx, and Asian neighborhood that was harder hit by COVID-19, slow streets really missed the mark. A lot of people responded by saying, well, we don't have time to go outside and play, we still have to go to work. This program doesn't really address our priorities. Residents felt like the city should be focused on helping people safely get to essential places instead, like health clinics, food distribution sites, and grocery stores. These places were often located on large, higher speed corridors with higher rates of pedestrian injuries and collisions. And so by working closely with community members and advocacy groups, efforts were redirected in East Oakland to increase the safety and accessibility of people walking and biking to these essential places. So for example, in this photo, they enhanced the safety of a crosswalk by using pylons to create a sort of a mid-block pedestrian island in front of one of these essential places. So this just goes to show that there is no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to creating safer streets and improving mobility. But by working more closely with community groups who are disproportionately affected by COVID, the city was able to make better decisions about how and where to install safety improvements to best address local needs. So all of the projects we've highlighted so far repurpose portions of the street for safer, active travel. However, closing streets completely to cars for select times during the day can achieve similar results and be even simpler from a logistical and infrastructure perspective. So school streets programs are ones that temporarily close a stretch of street in front of a school to increase the overall safety and experience of student pickup and drop-off activity. Normally, during these rush periods, children and their families, as you can see, are walking in between cars, and it creates for a pretty hectic environment. But school streets create a safer, healthier atmosphere for children at school, as well as encouraging them to walk or ride their bikes to school. All you need to do to make this change are a couple of barricades and a couple of volunteers to pull them out onto the road and take them away after the time closure ends. In areas that are disproportionately affected by COVID, this sort of program creates more safe space for walking and playing for children during the busiest times of the day in front of the school. We also know that these drop-off areas in front of schools, parents report them as being the most dangerous part of their child's commute. And then instead, using school streets, they can become impromptu playgrounds for a host of physically distanced, safe outdoor activities. Something similar we found in the town of Paradise, Newfoundland, a town of 21,000 people. Instead of closing down the streets entirely in front of the schools, they worked with an artist to coordinate dozens of students to paint the pavement outside of the school to clearly indicate to drivers that they are now entering a school zone and should slow down. They've done this in several different neighborhoods across the town and made sure to create a festive and celebratory community atmosphere on the day of the painting. So here you see community members have collaborated to paint an intersection mural that's also meant to slow down traffic and increase the safety and beauty of the neighborhood streets. Another children-focused initiative that we love is Homework Hubs in New York. These are pop-up open-air meeting places for students where they close off small streets so that kids can meet up with their classmates, access free Wi-Fi, find a book to read, use art supplies, and do homework together, all the while staying safe, socially distanced, and outdoors. In the winter, what's really cool is they partner with neighboring businesses to provide heat lamps and hot beverages and snacks for students. And by repurposing the streets to become safe, COVID-friendly public spaces, homework hubs have added to creating a safer and more enjoyable street network in parts of the city that are lacking child-friendly spaces, all the while supporting local businesses. This program is run entirely by a nonprofit organization called Street Labs, and the City of New York acts more of a facilitator, removing red tape and allowing them to take over the road space. And the last program in this category that I want to talk about are open streets programs, which temporarily open streets to people and close them to cars. There are many, many open streets programs across North America and the world, but we know that the best of them open up tens and tens of kilometers of streets for people to walk, run, bike, rollerblade, and skateboard and participate in physical activity. These streets, in essence, become paved parks or free outdoor gyms. They bring safe recreational opportunities literally directly to people's front doors and are especially impactful in communities that lack public space investment. Great, and so the next category of projects I want to talk about are focused on ways community organizations can help improve access and connections to transit. We know that essential workers are disproportionately affected by COVID, and this is the same group of people who continue to rely on transit throughout the pandemic. One way to improve access to transit is to host walk and ride audits, which is a really hands-on way to engage local residents in providing practical feedback for improving the public transit experience. So San Francisco transit riders host these walk and ride audits, primarily in racialized and low-income communities, and they're guided by the understanding that transit trips are not just stop to stop, but door to door. And so on these walk and ride audits, participants are asked to evaluate the sidewalk and the street network in addition to the conditions at the bus stops and experience of riding a particular bus route. Often, transit staff will join in on these audits, providing communities with the opportunity to share direct feedback. And then the transit riders organization will then develop a report summarizing the feedback from the audits, which will then be used to help inform the planning and design of these transit routes. Another project, one second, is one called Go Ave 26. It took place in a predominantly working class Latinx neighborhood in LA, and it set out to improve Avenue 26, a very car-oriented corridor that many people rely on, walk and bike on to access transit. LA Mass, the organization behind the project, conducted extensive community outreach to understand how this corridor could be improved to make it safer and more comfortable for people who are trying to connect to transit. And based on community feedback, Go Ave 26 features temporary design installations along the corridor, including an area with public seating and shade structures that also double as public art, patterns and art on the sidewalk and fences and poles to create a more visually pleasing environment. And some of this art also doubled as wayfinding signage that points to the metro station. And really beautiful murals by local artists in the underpasses to create a more comfortable walking experience. This project took place in a neighborhood that was one of the hardest hit by COVID in all of LA County. And its strengths are really in developing a unique community-based solution that improve connections to transit, a critical resource for so many people in the area. And the last set of projects I'll be talking about are more focused on community-based services and programs that address some of the barriers to getting around and staying active during COVID. These programs are a bit more straightforward to implement compared to projects that involve getting permits and working with local governments to change the design of the streets. So the first program is Snow Angels. These are volunteer snow shoveling programs that go by a lot of names. But the idea behind them is to pair volunteers with individuals who are unable to clear the sidewalks in front of their home. Snowy and icy sidewalks can exacerbate social isolation, especially during COVID, preventing many people, especially older adults and people with mobility challenges, from leaving their homes to access essential services. This program can help keep community sidewalks safe and accessible in the winter. In some communities, this program caters to people with specific needs. For example, the Eden Care Communities Foundation in Regina has a program that specifically helps paratransit users throughout the winter. So whenever there's a snowfall, a volunteer who's matched with the participant clears the sidewalk in front of their home so that they can safely board and access the paratransit vehicle. Keeping with the winter theme, the Winnipeg Trails Association has recently this year committed to creating 30 new skiing and walking trails in neighborhoods across the city. They saw how busy the trail system got in the summer, and so the goal of this program is to provide equitable access to the outdoors in every neighborhood throughout the winter as well. And what I like so much about this project is that it's really focused on making the existing assets of a community even more accessible through simple plowing and maintenance. The initiative is part of the Winterpeg project, which is a website that aims to create, map out, and promote winter activities like skiing, skating, biking, walking, so on and so forth. One other barrier people might have to being mobile and active and getting around in the winter is the lack of access to winter gear. Since January of this year, 4 Montreal libraries are offering anyone with a library card the opportunity to borrow winter gear for a week at a time and use it to enjoy winter and get around in the city. Winter equipment that's available for loan includes sleds, snowshoes, walking poles, and crampons. It's part of a new service from Parc called Parc Actif, and it's organized by a local nonprofit that promotes sport and access to the outdoors. And the goal, one of the early goals of this program is to first establish awareness and use of this program in disadvantaged areas of the city before scaling it up. As we've seen during COVID, more and more people have taken up biking as a safe way to get around during the pandemic. However, one barrier that many people face is the upfront cost of purchasing a bike. So Bike Match is a program created back in April 2020 by New York-based organization called Transportation Alternatives. And it was a direct response to the increase in demand among essential workers for bicycles as a safer way to get around during COVID. So all they did was they set up an online portal, a forum, and promoted the opportunity to match essential workers who were in need of a bike with people who were willing to donate a bike. And this program was so successful that they created a step-by-step guide for how to set something similar up in your own community, and dozens of cities followed suit. Another way of increasing access to bikes and biking during COVID is through a community bike share. Cochrane is a town of 5,000 people in Northern Ontario, and they were inspired by the bike share systems of bigger cities, but knew that the cost of bringing in a bike share company would be prohibitively expensive. And so way back in 2014, 880 Cities worked with the town and community partners to pilot a local bike share system to reflect the size of the community and as well as the assets that they had on hand. This involved collecting donated bikes of all sizes, fixing them up, and painting them in unique colors. They then set up some designated bike racks where people could take and return these bikes using purely the honor system. And so this continued for a couple of years, and based on the positive community response, they recently upgraded these bikes to these shiny blue guys on the right you see here, and they have a more coordinated formal system of checking in and out the bikes, but it still remains free for all residents and visitors. And the last program I want to touch on is called Bike Host by CultureLink. It provides newcomers with access to a bike and pairs them with local mentors who then arrange meetup times so that they can together explore the city on bike. According to participants, they really love this program because it's fun, it helps them exercise and stay healthy, and they get to know new people in the process. Participants leave the program with the confidence to integrate biking into their daily lives, which also helps them save on transit costs. This program is great because it really addresses many of the barriers a newcomer might have to biking in a new city. And in the context of COVID, it also helps provide a new and safe option for getting around. So I think those were 15 case studies. I went through them really quickly. Don't worry if you didn't catch everything, because we're going to be putting up a blog post on the 880 Cities website in the next few days that provide you with more detail about each of the projects that we explored, as well as some additional resources to help you with planning your mobility projects. So thank you so much, and I'll turn it over now to Rupal to host the Q&A.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rupal. I'm with Canadian Urban Institute, and I'm just here to facilitate a quick Q&A with Allison from Community Foundations of Canada. We're going to answer some of your questions that have shown up in the chat, especially those that might be pertinent to a large number of you. Usually when one person has a question, a number of other people also have that question. They're just not asking it. So to get us started, a really basic question, Allison. Can an organization submit more than one application to this program?
Thanks, Rupal, and thank you for the presentation. That was awesome. Great list of examples there. So there will be 2 rounds of funding. Organizations can submit 1 application per round, and organizations that have applied are welcome to partner with multiple other organizations that are submitting independent applications.
And what if you're an individual community member with an interesting idea, or a business owner with an idea? Can you apply to this program?
Yeah, that's a good question. So individuals and businesses are not eligible to apply for the Healthy Communities Initiative. There is a long list of eligible organizations available in the applicant guide. So I would encourage you to look there. And also I would encourage those who are individuals or businesses looking to get engaged to connect with local community organizations to see if there are ways that you can collaborate or partner with one another to work together on their project ideas.
And if an organization comes to round 1 and isn't successful in getting the funding, can they bring that same project back to round 2?
Yes, they can.
And is there an opportunity to get feedback on that application before round 2 or make changes?
Yes, there is definitely. You can unlock your application and submit changes, but there is no guarantee that you'll be funded in round 2.
Got it. And a lot of funding opportunities require folks to have matching funding, or they have a rule like you can't apply for 100% of your project costs. Is that the case with this program?
No, so 100% of the costs can be granted or funded through this program. And so we don't require any matching funding or anything like that. There's one stipulation around that piece, and that's if you are receiving funding from other sources, they can't be used to fund the same budget items, specific expenses as this funding.
Right. And if an organization wants to apply to maybe make their offices more COVID responsive, is that possible through this program?
Unfortunately not. So eligible projects must take place in public space and on public land.
And a new question just popped into the chat. If you receive the funding, is it like a loan? Does it need to be paid back eventually?
No. Nope,
Great.
it's funding, so it's yours. It's yours. You get to keep it. I think the important thing to note is that you do need to keep all of your records and your receipts and things like that, just in case there is an audit down the line. But it's yours to spend.
And what's the timing on the program? Like when, how long do people have to apply to round 1? When might they hear back about their project?
Right. So the timelines, I believe, are outlined online. I think the deadline for the first round is March 9th. I'd have to refer to my notes to go back and see exactly what the timeline is to be confirmed. The second round of funding will start up in June.
Got it. Just checking for any new questions coming in. If there aren't any, I always have extra questions, but it looks like one has just arrived. Would a school grounds or a school playground be considered public land?
That's a good question. I'm going to have to refer to my notes to get back to you on that one. I think we're just having some clarification on public land piece in terms of who owns the land. Preferably it's land that's owned by the municipal government or regional or federal government. That's how we would define public land. But we are just getting really clear on the details when it comes to land that is owned privately.
And so it sounds like what you're saying is if somebody wants to apply or an organization wants to apply and they're not sure if the land that they want to do their project on is eligible, they should just reach out and get a specific answer.
That would be great. Yes. So if anyone has any questions that aren't available or clearly indicated in the material, there is an email that we recommend that you reach out to, and that's chci@communityfoundations.ca. I think it's been put in the chat. I think maybe if someone could also put it into the chat there, that would be helpful. And we can follow up on that question.
Looks like I can give you a break, Allison, for a couple of moments. We've got a couple of questions for Lanric or Rosanna, whoever wants to jump in. A couple of questions about examples that are more applicable to rural areas, if anything comes to mind. You're muted, Rosanna. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there's lots of examples of mobility projects in rural areas. I think creating like community walking trails is one. Increasing the safety of intersections, I think, applies to both urban and rural contexts. I think, yeah, improving the walking experience, maybe by adding like a walking trail in the neighborhood. Yeah, I know, Amanda, you had mentioned some in the chat if you want to pop in.
Yeah, you kind of touched on quite a few of them. I think a lot of the examples that Rosanna highlighted in terms of programs as well are very applicable. And the school streets, I think one of the biggest assets in a lot of rural communities is usually having a really fantastic trail system, but often not great accessibility to the trails. So projects that actually connect trail systems and make them more accessible would be great examples as well, or even activating existing assets like walking clubs like Rosanna mentioned, or cycling clubs.
Right.
So
quick clarification from Allison about round 2 of funding. I'm just jumping in, Allison, to give you a chance to update the information there.
Thanks, Rupal. I just want to clarify the deadline for applications in round 2 is June. It's June 25th. The portal opens again May 14th. So you can apply as early as May 14th. The deadline is in June.
Perfect. And another question for the folks from 880 Cities. It looks like you all have a lot of experience working with municipalities and getting all of the necessary permits. So do you have advice that you might offer a not-for-profit or an organization that doesn't have all of that experience and might be considering a project where those permits are necessary?
yes, I think it comes down to building those relationships early on with allies in government, and it really speaks to, I think, Rosanna and Lanric's presentation around kind of this co-creation model. You really need to, the Danforth project is a great example where it was the local business improvement association, as well as the residents association, as well as the municipality, and the nonprofit kind of being that bridge between community and government, and sort of massaging the process along the way. But it does mean starting early and building around a shared vision at the start of a project.
Anybody else want to jump in on that one?
I think it helps.
Oh, yeah.
I think it helps to make sure that the councillor here in Toronto and other municipalities, start with your councillor, make that phone call, explain exactly what it is that you want to do, get them on your side, because they are going to be an amazing ally for you, negotiating and kind of weaving through the municipal pieces of the puzzle that you're going to need. But getting those councillors early and on side is a great advantage for your success.
So I feel like I know the answer to this question, Lenric, but what if you are a person who feels very nervous doing that? What's the advice on building that relationship and starting from scratch?
It's a great question, and truly I was nervous just giving this presentation. You're going to want to you can find other avenues to get an audience with your counselor. So that may be going through a business that is already a part of their business improvement area. So they may already have a relationship. You can try your local school. You can try maybe a local religious piece. Find other connections to that counselor or to the ones that are managing that space, to allow for a bit of a buffer, so that it's not just you going right to the counselor as such. And it may actually even help to have a few more allies with you to be able to showcase what it is that you want to create.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for doing that off the cuff. Allison, back to you. Quick question about whether municipalities are eligible to apply for this program.
Yes, they are. Definitely.
And a follow-up from a health-based organization who has an idea for a virtual mobility program that isn't necessarily taking place in the physical public realm. Is that eligible?
I think we would love to learn more about that project. So send us an email to that email address that was shared, and we can learn more and provide some more information.
Great. It looks like we are getting close to wrapping up. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. If anybody wants to throw something into the chat, I'll just take a look. And if not, I'll pass it over to Allison to wrap us up.
Sure. I see one good question I'd like to answer in the chat. Are projects eligible if they might be temporary? So for example, if the funding amount may only be enough to cover a pilot project, and if successful, we might choose to continue it in later years. Yes, so that would be eligible. We can fund temporary pilot projects. And it would be great if it could continue in later years. I think the only thing to remember for this program is that expenses must be spent. So the money that you receive must be spent by June 30th, 2022. So I can, I think, wrap up, Rupal, if we're ready. There's a poll coming. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you 880 Cities for the beautiful presentation. Rupal and the CUI team for hosting us today. This is just a quick poll just to learn a little bit more from you guys about how you experienced the session today. There are other community mobilization sessions that are coming up, and there will be more information about that shared in the chat with the schedule. Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining us today. It's great to be here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.